Greetings to everyone who decided to take a look at this tutorial. This is a first for me. First of all, my name's Rod Long. I'm a graphic designer and I've been in the business going on 30 years. This is a first. This is actually the first tutorial though that I've done after watching a ton of them. Today we're going to look at how to get a vector file from Affinity Designer into Blender. For the uninitiated, I've been beating my head against a wall for the last 3 years, last 3 weeks, trying to get this thing to work, really almost ever since the last stable version of Affinity Designer came out. I do a lot of 3D work for print. I also do some animation. I love animation, but the majority of my work, given that in a lot of cases I'm working on it from conception to final output, and a lot of the time I don't have help. I do have help nowadays, but a lot of the times in the past I don't. A lot of the things that we do, corporate logos, for example, those are big ones. Corporate logos, government seals. A lot of people love seeing those in 3D. My man Ronnie McBride recently posted a video tutorial on how to get your Affinity Designer assets into motion, which actually, tip of the hat to Ronnie, that's actually something else I work in. The 3D software that I'll be focusing on today is Blender. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Blender. First of all, it's open source. That said, for being open source, it is insanely powerful. Blender can do just about anything that Maya, 3D Max, Lightwave, and incidentally I am a Lightwave user as well, can do. If there are any things that Blender can't do yet, it's because a lot of those the big three might have features in them that are just hitting the market, on the consumer level, and they may have been able to integrate them early. Blender is still working on them. And on implementing those features. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I actually wasn't going to recreate this logo that I have on the screen in front of me, but I think I will, because there are a couple of key points that I want you guys to take in when you do your logo. So for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lock this layer. Oh, and also, by the way, this tutorial is being done on March 15th, 2015. I'm actually using the Affinity Designer beta, not the last full release. As of this writing, this particular beta is the release candidate 2. So probably within the next 2 weeks, maybe. And Matt P, all you guys, that's completely on you. It most likely will be released to the Mac App Store within the next 2 weeks. So hopefully not too long after this tutorial, this will be the main version. Sorry about that. My dog tends to go a little crazy when people come into the hallway. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, I'm going to lock, this layer is locked, and I'm basically going to make it invisible, create a new layer to work on. Now, that particular logo, I just wanted something quick and easy that I could create that, you know, looked, you know, I guess halfway decent for testing purposes. You know, you don't have to create this. Believe me, you don't have. I'm not expecting you to create that same logo. The idea is to get the vector into Blender as a 3D object that you can then extrude and animate. So what I'm using is, all I did was I created a circle, and what I'm doing is I'm holding down the Shift and the Command key. Trying to get the circle. I like to work as close to whole numbers, or if I have to go with point sizes, I try not to go past the hundredths, you know, in the decimal range. Now, here's the thing. You can either convert to donut or convert to pi. I prefer to convert to pi. I like the amount of control I get. So, okay, there we go. The whole radius, okay, it's a little, I thought I had it on 90, but I guess I went a little too far. And of course, you know, I'm just doing it this way, but of course, you know, you can always just type the values in. So, you know, I've got my hole, and I want this particular one to be a closed circle. So I would just grab that one edge and closed it up. Excuse me. I'm sorry. So now I'm going to deselect that and create another one. I've also, as you've noticed, I've also turned the grid on, so I can pretty much gauge exactly, you know, what I want to do, where I want to do it. You know, just get a feel for it. And then go back to convert to pi. And basically just do the same thing. I like to work with it this way. I like the interactivity I get. You know, I can basically just take a quick look and see where I am. If any of you are wondering why it seems to be a bit sluggish, I'm noticing that too. I believe it may be I'm using QuickTime for my screen capture, and I think that honestly may be why it seems just a bit sluggish. Okay. Double click on it to bring my points back up. I think I want to, and what didn't come out is, yeah, that's better. Okay. This probably won't be an exact replica of the one that I'd created before, but I just want to get close. That's, you know, that's pretty much the general idea. Just get close. Okay. Didn't deselect that time, so deselect, come on back. Again, Shift and Command, so I can draw the circle outward. Now, I don't know if anybody out there is really looking at how I'm creating the circles, but I'm just sort of keeping a running tally of the dimensions of each circle in my head. The first circle was roughly 3 inches. The second circle was 3.45. So I'm trying to make this one 3.9. I'm actually increasing incrementally by 0.45 inches. This time I wanted to try something a little different. I wanted to pull the angle back. You know, just try to. One thing, you know, most people's design teachers will tell them, symmetry is boring. Okay, so you know, try to create a little visual interest. After all, we are designers. I'm pretty much going to keep, you know, try to stay with the pattern here. Yeah, convert to pi. Go ahead and yep, widen that out a bit. And we've got, go ahead and deselect. Okay, so now we've got all this. Now, there are two things that are critical. And believe me, as I said, I've been beating my head up against a wall because, like many of you, I'm an ex-Illustrator user. As a matter of fact, if you're looking at this screen capture, you'll see Illustrator CS3 actually down in my dock right now alongside Photoshop. Note to Affinity, or more to the point to Serif, I hope to be able to take those off my dock very soon. But one thing you'll always want to do, and I had to get used to doing this in when I work in Designer because, again, I'm coming from Illustrator, like many of you are. I also do. I've done some work in freehand. So the one thing that I highly recommend, once you get done and you go ahead, select everything straight away, convert to curves. That's the first thing you want to do. Now the second thing I recommend you do, you just saw me click the curves button. The second thing I highly suggest you do is group. I don't know why this makes a difference in Blender. I honestly couldn't tell you. I did do some work trying to just bring straight SVGs into Blender, and they would always break them up into if those of you who know Blender, it would break them up into separate curves. When I grouped, however, they all came through. Now, a little sidebar, my original workflow was to go with, come from Affinity Designer, go to Inkscape, open the document in Inkscape, and just export it out. And those of you who know Inkscape, you have an options panel when you go to export, as you do in most softwares. You can go regular plain SVG or Inkscape SVG. Now, Blender generally likes the Inkscape written SVG files. I tried that, and I still got a lot of static in there. So what I was able to, there's I hesitate to call it a secret ingredient, but yes, there is an ingredient that's not readily known, and you have to use it. It's not on the Affinity side. It's actually on the Blender side. So, but first we'll export this. We're not going to do SVG. We're actually going to do PDF. And you'll understand why in a minute as soon as we go to the Blender side. We want to take this over to Blender without a background. So we will do that. I don't actually have text in this document, but if I did, you'd want to export the text as curves. You alternately, if the text, if the font you're using is in your system as a true type font, you could just export the graphic and build your font, build your text in Blender if you wanted to. If your font that you want to use is OpenType, you'll want to do it this way. You want to export the text as curves straight from Designer and bring it over to Blender. Blender does not read OpenType. It has problems with it. Now, that's been my experience. I have not yet seen anything in the Blender documentation going forward saying that that's been corrected. It may have been, it's one of the pitfalls of using open source. Sometimes you can find little Easter eggs in the software and not everything is documented. So without further ado, we're going to export this. I'm going to go ahead and keep it, on my desktop. Yeah, I got some stuff up here. I got a project I've been working on, and I'm a big fan of the Fox series Empire. I've got a project I'm working on with that as well. I'm not hired by Fox. It's just something, inspired by it. So this time we'll say 004, and anyone from Affinity who happens to be looking at this, I've often wondered why the software doesn't automatically put the suffix. For example, if you're exporting an SVG, why it doesn't just put .svg at the end of it. Most of the time you have a small indicator saying, hide the suffix or hide the file type. This just comes up, so for me, I find that I have to type it in. I just was curious why it did that. So I'm going to save this. Bam, on the desktop. Okay. And I think we're done here. Before we go all the way over to Blender, however, I want to show you the secret ingredient, so to speak. Go to Firefox. This is one of the extensions that you can find up on wiki.blender.org. Not everything. Anybody who's a Blender user knows that everything is not already put in the software. There are several add-ons. Blender's written in a programming language called Python. So there are several add-ons that people are making all the time. You can find a bunch of them in places like blenderguru.com, blenderdiplome.com. That's diplome, D-I, like diploma without the A. Blender Artist is a great place to find them. There are even some that are being sold up on cgcookie.com. has an area called the Blender Market, and I actually bought one called Motion Tool that I'm not going to incorporate into the tutorial today. But Motion Tool, it's a recent add-on for Blender that aids in doing motion graphics in Blender. So basically marry that concept up with today's tutorial and you have the potential for some very interesting projects. So I went ahead and opened up a tab. You can download it from here. That's actually the direct download link. I did also put the site, the Google site at sites.google.com that it actually links to if you want to go, that way to get it. Now, having said all that, now we're in Blender. 2.74 is probably going to be dropped in the next week or two, but this is 2.73a. And I went ahead and made sure I'm showing you this because, quite honestly, I can't stand, there's a lot of Blender tutorials out there, and they jump right in without showing you exactly which version they're using. Granted, that information is usually right here, but you have to sort of expand it to full screen to find that out. And if you happen to be looking at it at the tutorial on an iPad mini, sometimes you just don't, or just say a 7-inch tablet that doesn't have Retina, that's a pain. So just for your edification, Blender 2.73a. There is a reason. I generally was using 2.72b, but unfortunately the latest edition of the add-on we just downloaded works with this one and going forward. So here we are. So we're in here. Now this scene is in the cycles render. I've already set this up, and the reason being that you need to have a light in your scene. It's the 3D world, so I'm not going to do a full tutorial on 3D. But in the 3D world, if you bring stuff in and you don't have any light, sometimes you can have the scene light, which is generally called ambient occlusion. But if you don't have any light, it will not render well. So I went ahead and dropped a light in here. Cycles is the realistic renderer for the Blender interface. Just for clarity, Blender Render is going to be the baseline renderer that's going to be activated when you open the program. So you generally have to go to Cycles. Don't worry about the game engine. That's not something you want to use, that we're going to be concerned with right now. So as I said, this plane is actually the light. I've added an emission texture onto it so that, we have light in the scene. I didn't bother to put a floor plane in it, although you could put a floor plane in it and get some very nice effects. Our focus is just getting the file into Blender. For our purposes right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable look if I can find it. I'm going to disable the IO Vector plugin. I'm actually going to remove it because I want to show you how to install it. In case any of you out there have Blender but you've never really installed external add-ons. I said plugins. In a lot of other softwares these would be called plugins, but like I said, they're called add-ons. So what we're going to do is we're going to install from File. I have a folder right here on my USB drive. There's the file. Now, one thing about Blender, when you download your add-ons, most times there's going to be documentation telling you whether or not to unzip your add-ons. You can, you don't have to, but like I said, there will be documentation telling you. Sometimes if you unzip it by accident and you try to install it straight from the resultant Python file inside of the folder, it won't come in right. You can, as you can see right here, you have the option of installing a PY file or a zip file. In this case, we're going to install from the zip. Now, it saw it, it brought it in. We've got, description. This is why this is the secret ingredient. Blender's default one, and I'll show you that in a second. Right now, we're just going to check this to activate it, and I'm going to go back to the import-export menu under the user preferences. There's the one we just installed right there. Now, let me show you the one that is native with Blender. This one installs with Blender. This was the one I was trying to use that gave me so many problems. So, this is why I wanted to clarify a lot of stuff in this tutorial. If you're going to use Affinity Designer vector files in Blender, you want to bring them into Blender, do not import using the scalable vector file importer. Rather the native one that's built into Blender. Use the one that we just input, this one. And it allows you to bring in the vector. It will read all forms of Adobe Illustrator files. It will read the PDFs and SVG. So you get a lot, the way he's written the add-on, you get a lot more than you would with the standard SVG importer. Okay, I'm going to save user settings. I'm going to close up the user preferences. By the way, in case you guys didn't see where the user preferences are, they're right there under the file menu. That will open up that window to let you do what you needed to. Now, also, since we're here, we're just going to go ahead and import. Okay, so now we want this option at the bottom, vector files, AI, PDF, SVG. Now I've been here before, obviously, so it's still on the desktop. So now we've got all this, but here's the other thing I needed to show you guys. Okay, there we go. Let me drag this down a bit. There we go. Here's what else I needed to show you. You have options on the import. You don't just click on it. There's your selected file. That's what you want to bring in. But you have options on the import. Now, when I came in, it was at 0. So I'm going to bring the smoothness up to 1. I'm going to leave the subdivision at adaptive because you remember the two pi scale circles, for want of a better term, that I left open. Okay, I still want those edges to be fairly sharp, while I want the rest of it to be subdivided as a smooth curve. So I'm going to leave it on adaptive. I want to cap the back. I do want, if I'm extruding it, which I am going to extrude it, I want to cap the back. I want the front and the back actually capped. Blender can be a little funny sometimes, and I have not extensively worked with this import function, this particular one. And I will be honest with you, I just found out about it maybe an hour or two ago, being completely honest. So I figured I'd rush up here and throw together a tutorial. Like I said, I've been trying to do this for 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 months, somewhere in there. And I was just so excited when I found it. I said, okay, I've got to get this out. So now you have the extrude depth. If you click here, you can do it, it'll increase it in 0.03 increments. You can also click in on Blender and actually, I'm just going to do it at 0.1. The bevel amount, I'm going to be real judicious with that bevel amount. I'm going to say 0.000, oops, added 0.2. I'll leave the bevel pitch where it is. Now that I have these options set, I'll go ahead and click, and you could have just double clicked here as well. You set these and double click on the file you want, but for our purposes here, I'm going to double click. I'm going to click on the import button. Must have done something wrong. Okay. So the good thing about Blender is you can always keep trying. So in this case, I'm gonna hit X, delete. No worries. I'm gonna go right back in and try it again. Go ahead. This time, I'm gonna bring the smoothness up. I'll bring it up to 3 this time. There we are. Just didn't bring the smoothness up high enough. Now on Blender, what I'm going to do is, let's see. Now, for all of you who know Blender very well, you know all about the layer function. Blender has layers just like Photoshop, Illustrator, Affinity Designer, and Lightwave have. You can actually move objects to different layers. This is going to be our light, so I have to be very sure that I turn that light back on when I want to render. But for right now, what I want to do is I want to select that object we just created. Now, the reason for this, I want to show it to you. And I'm changing the view to top view. Not using the mouse wheel. I can zoom in. Okay. I can see where that didn't come in the way I wanted it to. So I can just go X for delete, delete it out. Import vector. But the point is, we are bringing this in through the PDF. So bring smoothness up to 5 this time. Import. Okay, and that's what we wanted. So I have to bring smoothness up a little more than I thought, but now you can see that. That's looking good. So now you have your 3D object in there. I'm going to go back to the default view in Blender. Okay. And basically in Blender, all this area that's gray, that's dark gray, this is outside the camera's view. The area right here is the camera view. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to make sure I activate my other layer. And there's one other thing I want to do with that. With that light, because as you can see that little piece of it, that will show up in the scene if I don't take care of this. So what I want to do is I want to go over to ray visibility, uncheck camera. Now the light will be there. We'll still get the benefits of the rays of light, but the but you won't see the actual plane that creates the light. So I'll go in here. Blender does everything in samples, so you kind of want to have a high sample. I'll just do it to 25. Well, that's the render, but the preview sample is what we want to be concerned about now. And actually, I'll do it to 100. I'll basically pause the video and skip ahead so you guys can see it, but got it there. Now, this is basically the solid view. You can do things in wireframe view in Blender, and see, now you see all the subdivisions that are in it that we brought in. Now when we go to rendered view, and you can see the clock count, this counting down. That's the 100. That's the 100 samples we did. And this is it's counting down to all the samples. So to give you an idea of the quality of render we can do. Now I could take this object. I could just right now I could take it. I could let's see. This lone control will drop the background out of it if I want. So if I hit transparent, you can see, if you can see the checkerboard pattern back here, that's the alpha channel. So you could take this file and bring it back into Affinity Designer, or for that matter, Affinity Photo, or the image editor of your choice, and use it or you know, even when Affinity Publisher comes out, you could drop the file into Affinity Publisher and use it in your layout. You know, the background's already dropped out, so you don't have to worry about clipping pads or anything like that. It's already, you know, you've already got an alpha. You can change the I like working in 3D software because you can change the camera on your file and bam, you've got a new illustration right there, set and ready. But yeah, I mean, you can also now piggybacking on what Ronnie McBride did, because I work in motion as well. A lot of the things I do, I'll create animations out of Blender, export them from Blender as image sequences at generally I work 720p. I'm doing a lot of stuff for corporate business presentations, and not really doing anything for, you know, production video. So the largest I generally tend to work is 1080p, and only then when I can't avoid it. But yeah, you can go ahead and animate this and actually use it in motion. Have your have another version, have a 2D version that you've exported from Designer. You know, fade that in, do some wild animation while this is, you know, rotating or spinning around in the background or something. You know, there's a lot you can do. And as I said, this is sort of to piggyback on Ronnie McBride's presentation. I hope this was informative, and you guys at Affinity, keep doing what you're doing. Farewell.